Remember, discrimination is part of the Irish history in Boston. The people of South Boston understand discrimination.
They may understand discrimination in South Boston, but some also practice it. And for years, so has the city's public housing authority. No blacks live in South Boston's 3 public housing projects because every time an apartment opened up here, whites got it, while blacks on the waiting list were bypassed. Last year, federal officials found it was discriminatory, and Mayor Flynn promised the practice would stop. Last night, he met with angry South Boston residents to try and explain the city's new policy of non-discrimination.
What we're talking about here is fair and equal access to public housing in the city.
But selling it in Southie isn't easy. Residents here call the policy forced housing, borrowing a slogan from the sometimes violent anti-busing protests of the 1970s, when this was the face that South Boston showed the world. 10 years have passed, but the thought of blacks moving into South Boston sparked anger here last night.
Our mothers, our fathers, our sisters, our brothers, our children, who cannot afford to live in private housing are going to be denied the right to live here in their own neighborhood of South Boston.
The coming integration of South Boston's public housing projects creates an identity crisis for Ray Flynn. He's at war with his neighbors over an issue of conscience, and though the law is on his side, it still hurts. It's Flynn's hometown, but Southie booed and jeered Mayor Flynn last night. One angry resident asked if Flynn was so interested in integration, when was he moving to Roxbury?
I've lived in South Boston all my life. My wife was born in South Boston. My children were born in South Boston. And I will live in South Boston all my life.
I think it's personally very trying. I think you saw him personally hurt. You're dealing with a political figure, though, who has succeeded because he's seen through those particular trials and not ducked that confrontation. Remember, he didn't have to go. And it would have been quite a different day today had he not gone.
Today, Neil Sullivan, Flynn's policy advisor, suggested that blacks may be moving into South Boston by April. But the important point, Sullivan says, is that no whites will be forced to move out of the South Boston projects in order to achieve integration. It's a point Flynn and BHA Director Doris Bunte both stressed in Southie last night.
No person, especially elderly people, will be displaced from their unit because of any fair housing policy.
What about the pace of change?
The average Boston housing development has a turnover rate of approximately 10% per year. And we're talking about developments that are over 1,000 apartments in many cases. So 10% may not sound like a lot, but what you really have to say is, wait a minute, does my neighborhood turn over 10% on an annual basis? But if we do our work well, then when a black family moves into South Boston or a white family moves into Franklin Field, they're moving into a place that they might want to live for a few years. And that certainly has been accomplished in Charlestown. And it's certainly the goal we have for South Boston as well.
For the 10 o'clock news, I'm Meg Vaillancourt.